All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on public right-of-way accessibility assessments. We're excited to share some insights and experience from a project we recently completed in Chino, California. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to send them in the chat, and then we'll go through them in order along with any other questions after the presentation. Our presenters today are Jay McComb of Quality Counts and Eric Sinagra of Pathview. With over 30 years of management experience under his belt, Jay serves as VP of Sales for Quality Counts. He is an esteemed expert in projects involving public right-of-way, ensuring safety and compliance with all local permitting and legal requirements. Jay is responsible for overseeing all horizontal curve assessment projects, including statewide efforts in Ohio, New York, Kentucky, and South Carolina, as well as numerous smaller projects across the U.S. Under Jay's leadership, QC has become the largest horizontal curve data collector in the US, with over 150,000 centerline miles collected and processed. Eric is the CEO and co-founder of Pathview. In 2014, Eric started Pathview to help people of all abilities, especially those with disabilities, find safe and accessible routes along all pedestrian pathways. Eric's passion for starting Pathview comes from growing up with an older brother, Nick, who uses a wheelchair. Eric has taken Pathview from conception into a growing and thriving small business. For the past 10 years, Eric has successfully managed the completion of numerous large-scale sidewalk and ADA public right-of-way assessments, including a 2,000-mile sidewalk condition assessment in Louisville, Kentucky. Since their inception, Pathview has assessed over 6,000 miles of sidewalks and over 70,000 curb ramps for ADA projects. We also have Lisa Almilli joining us today. She is the accessibility coordinator for the city of Chino and also the project lead for the work we will be discussing as part of the case study today. And now I'll hand it off to Jay to start us off.
Hi, I'm Jay. Yes, I did project manage this project in Chino, even though my title says Vice President of Sales. I do a lot of project management in that as well. So I don't only provide sales support, I do actual project management like I did in this project. So the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of sidewalk and pedestrian ramp data. In 1990, the American with Disabilities Act came into effect, and most of you probably weren't around, but I was back in 1991. I was managing parking facilities in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. And one of the projects we had to do was swap out our handicap accessibility signs that we had for our handicap ramps. We had to do some restriping and that kind of stuff too to meet those. But one of the things I noticed on the signs we were swapping out was they actually were in Braille, had Braille on them. And I'm talking to my colleagues saying, we got a lot deeper problems if somebody's looking for a parking space and trying to use Braille. So good thing things have changed along the way. I probably haven't seen one of those signs in 25, 30 years now. And now last year, the final ruling on rights of way accessibility guidelines, PROAG as it's known, came into effect. The Access Board approved it, finished publishing it, and approved it in last year, and then was adopted earlier this year by the General Services Administration. So there are new rules in effect. Not a lot of them aren't terribly wrong, but different. But there are some new rules in there, and in states like California, Lisa will talk about a little bit, has different rules than other states do as well. And states are starting to require having a transition plan in effect, at least a recent one in effect, in order to release state funding from FHWA funds. And then there's curb ramp infrastructure management. This process, in addition to making sure it's ADA compliant, gives you an inventory of your trees, your driveways, retaining walls. And one of the phrases that's being used in the parking and mobility industry a lot now is the highest and best use of curb space. That is valuable resources there. It used to be you wanted highest and best use for land plots, whether it be Class A office space or parking deck or residential type of thing. What's the highest and best use? What can you generate the most revenue out of? And agencies across the country now are starting to realize that's very, very valuable curb space that you can get the highest and best use out of, whether it be parking or loading and unloading, or bike parking, or scooter parking, that kind of thing, bus stops. There's lots of uses for that curb space and a lot of demands on it. So this helps give you an inventory, a digital map, should I say, of exactly where your curb space is and what condition it's in. I'm going to go to the next slide there. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about this project scope, and then I will pick it back up when it comes to project management and timelines.
Thanks, Jay. So I'm going to go over briefly here the scope of the project with Chino, as well as talk about the methodology that we use to collect the public right-of-way data. So in Chino, we assessed all of their sidewalks, curb ramps, pedestrian signals, and bus stops for the prowl part of the assessment. As part of that, we assessed 371 miles of sidewalks and almost 3,800 curb ramps, as well as we identified the gaps in the sidewalk network, where there were missing sidewalks, where there were missing curb ramps, and then also identified areas where sections of the sidewalk were not measurable due to vehicles or construction or some other significant obstacle like that, and identifying where the city might have provided they provided reference layers to us, and identifying where maybe their reference layer needed to be updated. So we identified all of those assets as part of this project. So the way in which we assessed the sidewalk portion of the project was with our PathMet equipment. So PathMet is a manually propelled sensor-based device that you can see on your screen there. It objectively rates the conditions of the sidewalk, gathering continuous readings every millimeter. It uses accurate laser measurements. We use this approach combined with our other sensors to efficiently and cost-effectively gather very high accurate data. Typically, projects might be done with a tape measure and a level, or hand assessments or visual assessments, or even LiDAR is a big topic nowadays. Our equipment is cost-effective and can quickly and more accurately measure than even those LiDAR sensors that you might be familiar with. We gather images every 10 feet as well, so we can capture this virtual environment, if you will, of the sidewalk down the pathway. It's all GIS integrated, and we use the reference lines from the city to ensure that we're collecting all of their sidewalks and that the network is complete. And we also have a feature in the app for this equipment to flag items by the technician. They're configurable, so it's fully configurable. We worked with the city to identify exactly what types of features they wanted the technician to flag, and things like heaving and spalling of sidewalks, if there were low clearances from trees or vehicles on the sidewalk, and other unique conditions, such as where a tree root was pulling up a sidewalk, or even where there's a guy wire. So we work with the city to identify those conditions ahead of time, in addition to incorporating the required aspects from ProWag. So our CurbMet equipment was used to collect the curb ramp data, the pedestrian signal data, as well as the transit stop data. It's also an objective sensor-based, app-based system. It replaces the tape measure that you typically would use and allows you to stay in a standing position. Through the app, it's fully GIS integrated, and it also utilizes the configurable data and configurable curb ramp types that the city or state might have. So for example, every state has different curb ramp types that they call them. Here in Pennsylvania, where I am, we have type 1, 2, 3, 4. Out in California, they have A, B, C, D. But even Chino had very specific requirements as well that are even more in depth than the ADA requires. And so we worked with the city, we incorporated those curb ramp types and the qualitative attributes, the slope and distance data that was needed for that. And the app walks you through the process of identifying what type it is, if it's a parallel versus perpendicular, all of the measurements that are needed, and then gathering that data quickly and efficiently to identify ADA compliance. So this is how, our approach for those assets. So for QA/QC, we have a number of different methods in place to ensure both completeness as well as accuracy of the data. We do weekly calibrations of the equipment. We do daily and weekly checks of the devices to make sure that none of the nuts and bolts are loose, the cameras are angled properly, and various aspects like that. The data is gathered both by the sensors, every millimeter, as I mentioned, continuously along the network, but it's also flagged by the technician. So we have this complementary data set of technician reported information, as well as the sensor-based data to say the technician reports there's a level change, but we also know that it's precisely a 0.35 inch level change, and we can help to gather both data sets in that way. We have live air handling to catch if there's any issues with the data collection, or if the technician accidentally forgot to press start or forget to press stop, things like that. The techs there's reviews in the data, as well as our team reviews it afterwards to identify any anomalies in the data set, reviewing images, and going through the process to identify any issues there, and recollecting the data if necessary, and going back out into the field. But through our previous process, it helps reduce the recollection of data. And finally, you can see an image there of the red and green on the map. The red are the reference lines that was provided by the city. And then the green are what is collected live by the technicians. And they can see right away where they've collected using the green lines. We provide dashboards to both the technicians as well as Jay's team to help, and the city to help track progress and identify where data has been collected, how much is left, and where needs to be collected. So the deliverables for the PathMet data is typically it was delivered to the city as GIS layers in 2 different layers, or actually more than that, but 2 of those layers were the block-based layers of sidewalk center lines, as well as chunked up 10-foot segments. So the block-based layers help to kind of aggregate on more of a macro scale how good or poor each block is. But then we break that up into the 10-foot segments to match up with the images, but also provide more of that micro level scale to identify exactly where specific level changes or slope issues or other obstructions are along the pathway. And so we help to aggregate and prioritize in that way. The attributes that are collected for each of those segments include items like level changes and tripping hazards, the running slope and cross slope. Roughness is a unique measurement that our equipment is able to measure. We developed a standard, an ASTM standard, on roughness related to wheelchair user comfort. And so our equipment is uniquely qualified to measure that. It was designed to characterize especially items like brick and paver surfaces that are oftentimes criticized for being accessible. So it's inaccessible. So it provides an objective way of rating roughness according to that standard. We also gather things like passable width, material, those flags that I mentioned, and then an accessibility and pavement score to rate and prioritize the sidewalks in both ways. Pavement, more looking at the tripping hazards and issues like that. Accessibility, looking at the overall condition methods. And then not measurable segments. Where were there significant amounts of construction or overgrowth that we just could not, or vehicles where we could not collect data? So the data and deliverables for the curb ramps and ped signals and transit stops was delivered as a GIS point layer. All of those individual asset points contained all of the necessary attributes and measurements that were collected during this project. They include things like the type of curb ramp, the material, whether there was a detectable warning or not, all of those running, slope and cross slope, length and width measurements, and all of the necessary measurements for both PROAG as well as the city defined measurements that were desired. We identified if there were any major obstructions and produced and worked with the city to identify a configurable score to help prioritize the improvements. And this score takes into account both, again, the required measurements as well as how the city planned to address and prioritize those improvements. Of course, we identified where there were missing curb ramps, and then where there were not measurable assets, whether they were curb ramps or the bus stops or ped signals. And the not measurable ones were typically things like there was a reference point, but there was actually no curb ramp at that location. So helping to update that data set for the city. And now I'll pass it back to Jay.
So big part of the project definitely was project management and timeline. And I'm going to go through this page pretty quickly because I have some additional slides for the most important ones. So hiring and training local technicians. In this case, we knew we were going to be on site for 60 to 90 days, and we needed local people to help us collect the data. It's the most cost-effective way, not paying per diem or hotel rooms and travel and all that kind of stuff. And it's the most really sustainable way of doing these types of projects. And then you go into monitoring the early days of data collection. After you do the training, you want to make sure the training stuck. And if it didn't, certain aspects of it, you do additional coaching and you identify other potential issues, like maybe you didn't have a proper setting on the equipment, the tablet and that kind of thing. You want to ensure that technicians are meeting daily goals. We don't have a quota, but we know what we based our perform on. And if somebody's not meeting the daily goals, then they need additional coaching. If they're doing better than the daily goals, we like to reward them. And that's usually financially, probably at the end of the project, or a raise during the project. Keeping the equipment charged, you wouldn't think that's a difficult thing to do, but I'll talk about that in another slide here in just a minute, but you definitely want to have a plan for it. Ensure the data is uploaded from the device. Again, that seems like an easy task, and it should be, but it's not always. And then in this case, we had some technicians that dropped out early on, didn't like the work or didn't like the setup, whatever the situation was. And so we had to go in and hire and train additional technicians, and I'll tell you about that as well. And then the tracking data collection efforts, that's really using the dashboard maps that you saw and making sure we're staying on track, that we're going to meet our deadline, that the project will be done on time. You can go on to, thank you. So hiring technicians. About 6 weeks before we had the go to start the project, we put advertisements in local, not newspapers, certainly that's old fashioned, but local tech. Indeed probably is our main source of using that. Advertise locally, explain what the project is, explain what they'll be doing so there's no surprises. And then the next step is to screen all the applicants. And over a 6-week period of time, you can imagine there's quite a few applicants, but narrow them down to people you want to phone screen. And then narrow down from the people you want to phone screen to the people you want to do in-person interviews with. So by the time by the time I flew in, the week the project started, really the week before the project started, I flew in on a Monday morning, had interviews Monday afternoon, evening, into Tuesday morning, made decisions on who we wanted to hire on Tuesday, informed them, made them offers. If they accepted the offer, they would be onboarded on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we would start our training. And then on Friday, we'd finish the training, doing a lot of self-evaluations on using the equipment and that kind of thing, or working as teams and making sure each other knows how to use the equipment. And then the project really started the next Monday. We can work on the weekends. Some technicians like to work on the weekends. This is their second job that they're doing for a short period of time. Some people like to only work weekdays. We kind of let them decide and try working around their schedule. Sometimes we have to do some convincing. It needs to be done another time. But yeah, it is weather dependent. It can't be raining a lot. We did this in the summertime last summer in Chino, and during July and August, it got pretty hot. So the hours were early morning. They would get up and get out there sunrise and work until noonish when the sun got high, because it does have issues on the equipment. Keeping the equipment charged. I thought that was going to be an easy plan. We had the original plan was to have a storage unit, put the equipment in night storage unit, charge it up, that kind of stuff. But I didn't realize storage units don't have electrical outlets, because they don't want people living in them. So we had to go about a different way. We tried using portable battery packs, and that worked to some degree, but not terribly efficiently. So we got to the point where we let technicians take the equipment home with them and charge it from their home, and at the same time get it online to do the uploads and downloads and that kind of stuff that need to be done. But in any case, make sure you have a plan on how you're going to charge the equipment. There's multiple batteries for the tablets. There's multiple batteries for the Path Met, not so much the Curb Met, but the Path Met has a couple batteries in it as well. So on to the next one. And Eric, this is yours. Nope, it's mine. I'm sorry. Data upload and download. Make sure you have high-speed internet, and that there's communications with the text between text and PathView. PathView is on the East Coast, and Chino's on the West Coast. So in this particular case, we made sure that our technicians had a text number for a PathView technician to know when the tablet would be online, which is usually sometimes late at night on the East Coast. But PathView did a good job of keeping up with it and doing the work they needed to do while the tablet was online. And then the project, that makes sure the project map is up to date every day. They know where they need to be collecting data. We don't want to double collect data. So you have multiple technicians doing the sidewalks. You want them coordinating. Same with the curb ramps. And then the device needs to be kept up to date. They're always improving it and coming up with new ideas on how to do that. So we want to make sure we're using the latest and greatest. And then, Eric, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So now I'm going to go through some sample data that was collected and go through the dashboard a little bit, and we can dive into some more specific details later on if time permits. So this is a screenshot of the dashboard, or a version of the dashboard that we developed for the city. You can see a number of different things on this screen. First of all, you can see the map of the green, orange, and red lines to help prioritize where improvements are needed. And that's based off of the accessibility index that we worked, the score that we developed with the city. So really helping to provide a good visual for that prioritization. Then you see a pop-up in the middle of all of the data, containing the data for that particular 10-foot segment, and an image that's associated with that segment. So each segment has all of this data plus more than what you can see there contained within it. Then you can query, different filters and different types of data, and pull up a screenshot on the left here of the image of each of those various items contained within that query, such as show me all of the level changes an inch or more, or show me all the cross slopes 2.1% or more that don't meet the PROAG requirements. And then just on the right there, you can see a legend of what's being displayed, as well as other filter or other layers that can be shown, such as one for each of the level changes, roughness, and the various attributes. So you can kind of identify compliance according to each of those attributes as well. And then this is another version of the dashboard that you can see all of the data included, from the line segments, the sidewalk segments, to the curb ramps and the ped signals and those orange triangles there. And then the black lines identifying where there are gaps, sidewalk gaps in the network. And then providing some high-level feedback and information about, how many miles of missing sidewalks, or where there are, how many segments have 36-inch or less, passing width, how many missing curb ramps, and how many sidewalk segments have been repaired, and helping to provide a tool to keep up to date, as well as manage these improvements as the city continues to make improvements as a result of this project that we did with them. You can see a screenshot of all of the ped signals here, and an image of one of those showing the image of that particular ped signal, as well as the data that was collected. What is the push button height? Does it have a push button arrow that is required, and other data associated with those ped signals. And this last one here is a screenshot of just the narrow the pinch points, or the narrow segments along the paths. And you can see there that this particular image, this particular segment, has a pole in the middle of the sidewalk. It looks like the passable width might be only 24 inches or less, which is not within that requirement by both PROAG as well as the California state requirements. So we can filter and help the city really identify where those narrow segments are, and help to prioritize. And sometimes they take more detailed influence of, this is a pole in the middle of the sidewalk. So that takes a more detailed process to remove that barrier, versus something like a overgrowth into the sidewalk, or some other sort of characteristic. So really helping to prioritize and filter by those. So now I would like to welcome from the city of Chino, Lisa Almelli, who's the accessibility coordinator, and who was the project lead for this project. And just so you can hear her kind of testimony and feedback about the project, I'll ask her a few questions. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Eric.
So my first question, I have 3 questions in total. My first question for you is, can you just share a little bit about how the project went as a whole? Any information, feedback that you'd like to share about the project?
Sure. It seemingly fast is the word that comes to mind. I was really impressed with how quickly the massive amounts of data was able to be collected and then processed. As Eric mentioned, I had a lot of metrics that I wanted included for the city. I wanted to make sure that we captured not only the big ticket items, but also some of the more finer points. And what was great about that, as Eric mentioned, is it could be tailored to whatever the jurisdiction needs. And so it's very helpful having all of this data to be able to run different reports, to be able to do various things with it. I think the project as a whole, one of the big things too is the communication I felt overall was outstanding, and just getting the updates. It was a weekly or biweekly basis. I was in constant communication, just kind of making sure everything was going smoothly, or if we had to, schedule different things. So I think overall, it was a really good process. And it gave me a lot of confidence in what was being collected and what we were going to get as a result.
Thank you.
Mhm.
My second question for you is, can you share any issues that you might have experienced, and were there issues? And if so, how were they addressed with you?
Sure. I think so we started collecting data, I believe it was April of 2023. So April of last year, I think we started right after our major rainstorm because we had to delay it a little bit. And it was about a 5-month process overall, at least from my perspective. So again, as the recipient of the data, it was about a 5-month process. And I know that there was an issue with transferring to an automated upload process. I know it was something that it was new, and it was addressing those issues. I think it took a few weeks to get that ironed out, but overall, it was just a little bit of a delay. It didn't delay any of our major goals very much. And once that was resolved, I think the final QA part of it, which I think was hugely important for the final product, was making sure all those lines and locations were geolocated correctly. So we didn't have a curb ramp in the middle of the street or in someone's backyard, and making sure that everything, fit and was properly coded. And again, throughout any of that transfer delay process, Eric, you were great, providing those regular communication updates, so that I could make sure that my executive management team had the information they needed on the status of the project. And like I said, the end result was a quality product. And I think, it was resolved in a good way, in a timely manner, with lots of communication, which I think is always helpful for the client.
Great, thank you. Yes, I recall a few challenges there on the data upload at the time, trying to work towards an automated system, and glad we were able to work with you and get that resolved.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, how are you using the data, or how do you intend on using the data, including the dashboard and other data that we've provided to you?
Oh, absolutely. So the dashboard, first and foremost, is great because it's a snapshot that easily, I can, show, or people can look at internally to say, where's the progress in how we're remediating these facilities. We are using this data for our public right-of-way transition plan. We're also using it for our maintenance plan to maintain accessible features. So anything like the tree root uplift to sidewalks, or again, overhanging bushes, even the pole that you showed, those types of things. How do we work around those and address those things, whether it be through maintenance or through other construction. We're using it for planning purposes for our capital improvement program projects, and also our land development. So we can go into any of the data points when we are having, let's say a new construction happening, to say the sidewalk is compliant or is not compliant, the curb ramps are compliant or not. And one of the things that I really, it kind of was an moment was when I realized how detailed those measurements were. Even with the curb ramps, it's equivalent to a 1-foot level. So it's highly accurate. It's probably more accurate than we would find going out and dropping physical level, because we would use a 2 or a 4 foot. So getting that information, having that readily available to be able to communicate for our planning process is hugely beneficial to the city. And again, we're going to use that information as well as the dashboard to do annual accessibility reports back to our city council on the progress of our transition plan. So, I mean, we're still in the early stages. We just, we're kind of getting the workflow down, but it's a really, really helpful information and tool.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks for all that feedback.
Oh, absolutely.
And at this point, I think we are opening it up to any question and answer.
So far, there's no questions in the chat. If anyone has any, feel free to drop them now.
So then if there are not at the moment, I'll give a moment for any questions to come in. But I think at this point, I will continue to just go through a few of the examples, just diving into some images of the data that was collected. And Becca, if any questions come through, please just interrupt me.
Will do. Oh, we got one.
Oh.
So the first question is, what was the budget for this project?
I might have to defer to you, Lisa, if you have that offhand.
Sure. I was like, I don't know who you're asking. We did our entire self-evaluation and transition plan. So this was a portion of it. So we have about, our city is 29.7 square miles. And as Eric mentioned earlier, I think it was either Eric, well, however many miles of sidewalk, was looked at. I want to say it was for the public right of way specifically, it was roughly 325,000 was in the budget for that. It's a very rough number. I know it was the majority of our overall project. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the next question is, do you tie into any pedestrian volumes for these streets?
So we don't yet, but we certainly could with our traditional data collection services. We use cameras and AI and we could take sampling over a period of time, and we could certainly do that in addition to. We haven't done it to this point yet.
Okay, and then you recommend agencies buy the equipment or hire someone to do the work?
So I can share how we've worked, and I don't know if Lisa or Jay, if you want to chime in from your perspective. What we do is we lease out our equipment, and so in this particular case, we leased it to Quality Counts to do the data collection for the public right-of-way portion of the project, and we did then the analysis, QA/QC, final GIS data delivery. And I think my perspective is typically, working with Quality Counts, we were able to have some really good technicians using the equipment. They manage the project, they manage the technician and the performance and things like that. We've had other projects before where maybe an intern used it, or some younger students and things like that. And sometimes you get what you pay for in that regards. So you working with Quality Counts, we were able to get some really good data, and they know the system now in and out, so they can collect that very efficiently as well.
Okay, and how did the program determine sidewalk gaps? Does that mean all streets without sidewalks or specific areas?
So in this particular case, we had the reference lines, which I believe were on both sides of the street, and so generally we identified if there was, we would go to a street, and we would identify if there wasn't a sidewalk there, we would identify that there was no sidewalk there. So it's not only if it's a gap connecting some sidewalks, connecting those sidewalks, but also if there was no sidewalk at a particular street. So we use that reference map as the kind of starting point. We went and looked, and if there was no sidewalk there, we marked that there was no sidewalk, i.e. a gap, and reported it in that way, in addition to those gaps in between that could connect a sidewalk. There, in some of the areas where maybe there wasn't a reference layer or a reference point, typically that area might not have been really looked at in completion, but typically what that means is there's an area that's known not to have sidewalks or not to be under the jurisdiction's, kind of responsibility. And I think I want to ask maybe Lisa, if you're able to chime in as far as how you use or could use the information about gaps connecting the sidewalks versus just areas where there's missing a sidewalk that does not exist.
Sure. Yeah. And we do have places where there are like 4 or 5 panels missing. So it's literally a gap, and other areas where it's just non-existent. We haven't really gotten into addressing some of those, but I like right now there's a development, and looking down, I can see that, 2 sides of the development have 0 sidewalk, the other sides do. And it's knowing it's not a gap, but it's just literally the facility doesn't exist. So we use the gaps usually when we're addressing some things during our maintenance, to be able, if we're doing some projects in the area, to be able to go sometimes connect those gaps. It's possible.
And for other, it does. Thank you. And for other projects, what we've had to do, so not every city has a map already of their sidewalk center lines or has that reference layer. So we'll use the street layer as a baseline, so we know that we go to or look at in some capacity every sidewalk segment. So sometimes that means looking at it ahead of time through aerial imagery or Google Street View or driving by or things like that. And then other times that means physically walking to those locations as part of the data collection process to confirm whether there does or does not exist a sidewalk. So there's different processes depending on if what reference data exists.
All right, next question is, what was the most surprising thing you saw from the data for Chino specifically? Maybe something you thought wasn't an issue but was, or something you thought was going to be an issue but wasn't?
It's a great question. Not to put you on the spot, Lisa, do you have anything that you can think of?
I was trying to think as well. Not really. I know there were a couple of lines, and we talked about it, that didn't connect, and it looked like there were gaps, but then the pictures were there, and it was just kind of doing a couple of those touch-ups. But I don't feel like that was a major issue or anything. That's just more of a, going back through. But I feel like I don't really have anything that I think would really answer the question.
That's what I'm trying to think of as well. I might have to circle back. Our technician who goes through every line and every sidewalk would probably be the most suited to answer that question. Unfortunately, he's not on the call today, so sorry for not being able to support an answer there.
I mean, I could say there were no surprises as far as the results of the data. I was not surprised to have the major amounts of pinch points, the uplift. I guess the most surprising thing to me was how much compliant sidewalk and compliant curb ramps we had, which is a pleasant surprise. So I'll take that any day.
and maybe something that would would be surprising, and we see this across most cities that we work in. Cross slopes are one of the highest non-compliant portion, and part of that is you need to have that cross slope for the water runoff. You have the driveways a lot, and so you just have frequent non-compliance for those driveways. And when we worked with you, Lisa, I remember you specifically saying, we want everything. We want to know all of the information. We want to know, we don't want exceptions per se for the driveways in that sense. So, that's something that wasn't surprising, but it's, somewhere around half to 2/3 of pathways have a non-compliant cross slope for various reasons.
Okay, the next question is, when you fix or add facilities, what is the process for measuring and adding updated data?
I can take this one. So basically, we go out with our tools, our own tools, for a remediated facility. We do, the measurements. We have public works inspectors who will go out and do the measurements to ensure compliance. Once a curb ramp, let's say, or a section of sidewalk is compliant, they take a photo. And then those photos are, we upload them. I upload them to the GIS. There's a way to be able to add the new compliant photo, as well as the date, so we know when it was remediated. And so that we can do that with new, so that's to fix them. And then if we wanted to add new where there previously was none, whether it's sidewalks or curb ramps, it's the same process. I don't have the curb met tool, so we use our tools just to verify compliance, and then we don't input all the specific data. We just verify it is compliant in all the ways, and it meets all of the requirements, and then just add the line, add the dot, add the photo. Eric, if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, that's pretty much it. Providing some updated information, without having us come out there. It's using the tape measure and a level, photographic feedback, essentially allowing you and your team to manage how you're saying something has been addressed versus, it's still being outstanding.
Another question is, who builds these sidewalks? Does the city of Chino have an internal concrete team?
We do have an internal concrete team, but that's mostly for maintenance. We use consultants. We have some on-call consultants for concrete. If the project is big, we're like currently we put out an RFP, bid package for curb ramps as a whole, maybe just in addressing them in a specific project. So we do have an internal team, but mostly that works with maintenance or very small projects.
And then how is this project procured and the Pathview Quality Counts team built?
Okay, so we put out an RFP for a self-evaluation and transition plan, and then awarded the project. And so that project was awarded, and that consultant had Eric, and it goes from there. Basically it came with the package, which was amazing for us. I'm gonna let you guys maybe answer that from that perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things we wanted to mention earlier, so for transparency, both Jay or both Quality Counts and Pathview were subcontractors to Bureau Veritas for this project, who was the prime and completed the managed the project as a whole for the transition plan, and then also did the facilities assessments. And then Jay's team and my team worked pretty much as the main ones on the public right-of-way portion. So that's why we talked about the public right-of-way portion here. We worked together and managed that. So we've worked with Bureau Veritas on a number of projects before, and continue to work with Quality Counts and Bureau Veritas and Pathview together on a number of projects. So we've kind of created a partnership here for these types of public right-of-way projects and ADA transition plans as a whole.
To give a little more history, Eric and I met at TRB probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Exactly.
And we looked at different ways we could do projects together, and didn't really do something until about 2-3 years ago, and did a smaller project together, and then have just kind of continued on doing projects together and apart, to be very frank. But yeah, it's worked out really good. We've developed a good working relationship, and it's all any partnership's based on communication. And Eric lives in the neighborhood I grew up in 40 years ago, so it was kind of fun. And I'm in Nashville now, so he's in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, can the PathMet sidewalk unit also identify local and private utilities as it scans? Examples include water gate valves and fiber handhole boxes.
The answer is yes. We would just need to know that ahead of time, prior to doing the data collection and the data analysis, and we can do that in a few different ways. We could have the technician flag those various items as they're walking by. That's the beauty of the configurable flags. But also we can work on a process to either review that in the imagery review in the images that are collected, or through even AI processes that we're building out. So just kind of knowing what type of data is needed at the very beginning and answering all those questions goes a long way in the analysis and QA/QC process.
And that's all that I have for questions.
Great. Thank you all for all of your questions.
Yeah, and I think since we're butting up against our time, give people a few minutes back, we can end it here. But thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate your contribution and your attendance, and let us know if we can help you out with any projects.
And I'll be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who received the initial invite. So if you want to share it or watch it again.
Thanks, Becca, for setting all this up.
Yes.
All
And
right,
thank you, Lisa, for being here.
Yes,
yeah, thank you so much, Lisa.
Absolutely.
Bye.